Useless, Todd muttered, tossing the book onto the table like it was trash. I stared at him, my chest tightening. What? This, he said, gesturing dismissively at the handmade scrapbook I'd spent weeks creating. This is the best you could come up with? A pile of pictures and sentimental garbage? You're ridiculous, Lydia. My hands clenched in my lap, but I forced myself to stay calm. I thought you'd appreciate something meaningful. It's a collection of memories, everything we've been through together. He rolled his eyes. What we've been through? Please. I'm tired of all this overly emotional crap. You could have gotten me something useful, but instead, you waste time on this nonsense. It's embarrassing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep the sting of his words from showing on my face. Todd, No, he interrupted, standing up and running a hand through his hair. You don't get it, do you? This isn't working anymore. You're not working anymore. I need someone who can actually add value to my life, not drag me down with this pathetic attempt to be thoughtful. My stomach twisted. What are you saying? He smirked, crossing his arms. I'm leaving you, Lydia. I've met someone else. Mara. She's 20, exciting, and she actually knows how to have fun. Unlike you. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to let him see the impact. And you think this is the right way to tell me? I asked, my voice trembling but steady. After I put my heart into this? He laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. Your heart? That's the problem, Lydia. You're all heart and no substance. I deserve more. I sat there in silence for a moment, his words echoing in my head. And then, to my own surprise, I started to laugh. It wasn't a bitter laugh or a forced one. It was genuine, loud, and it cut through the tension in the room like a knife. What's so funny? Todd asked, narrowing his eyes. I stood up, still laughing, and reached for the book. You don't even know what you're walking away from, I said, flipping to the back page. What are you talking about? He asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. I pulled out the folded deed tucked into the final page and held it up. This. The deed to a vacation house I bought for us. I was going to surprise you tonight, but I guess that's off the table now. His jaw dropped. You bought a vacation house? I smiled sweetly, slipping the deed into my purse. Looks like Mara won't be enjoying that, will she? Todd's face twisted into something between disbelief and panic. For the first time all evening, he was at a loss for words. You bought a house? He finally stammered, his smug confidence crumbling. Since when do you make decisions like that? I tilted my head, my smile never wavering. Since I realized I can't depend on you for anything meaningful, Todd. While you were busy finding excitement with a 20-year-old, I was building a future. For us. Silly me for thinking we wanted the same things. He opened his mouth to retort, but closed it again, his eyes darting to the book still lying on the table. It was as if he were trying to figure out how this had slipped through his fingers. You're overreacting, he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. This doesn't change anything. Mara and you? I cut him off, shaking my head. Todd, I don't care. Take her, take your exciting life, and get out of mine. You've made it abundantly clear where I stand. I walked out of the living room and into the bedroom we once shared, the sound of Todd's sputtering excuses following me. As I packed a small overnight bag, I could hear him pacing, probably trying to figure out how to salvage the situation without admitting he'd completely miscalculated. I paused for a moment, staring at the photos on the dresser, wedding pictures, trips we'd taken, moments that once seemed so full of promise. They felt like relics from another life, one I'd been clinging to for far too long. By the time I returned to the living room, Todd was standing by the door, his arms crossed in what I assumed was an attempt to look composed. You're really just going to leave? He asked, his tone incredulous. I am, I said simply, brushing past him. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're being petty, Lydia. You'll regret this. I paused at the door, turning back to face him. Maybe. But at least I won't regret staying in a marriage where I'm nothing but a punchline to you. With that, I stepped outside, the night air cool against my face. I felt the weight of Todd's expectations lift off my shoulders. As I drove away, the deed safely tucked in my bag, I realized I wasn't leaving with just my belongings. I was leaving with something far more valuable, the clarity that I deserved better. Let Todd have his fun. I was done playing the part of the loyal wife in his selfish little game. I drove straight to Grace's house. She was the only person I could think of who would truly understand what had just happened without judgment. When she opened the door, she took one look at me and frowned. What did he do this time? Can I come in? I asked, my voice steady but tired. She stepped aside, waving me in. Of course, kitchen or living room? Kitchen, I said, knowing she'd already be reaching for the wine. Minutes later, we were seated at her small kitchen table, a glass of Merlot in front of me and her undivided attention across from me. So, she said, leaning back in her chair. Spill. I took a deep breath, recounting everything, from the scrapbook to Todd's cruel words to his grand announcement about Mara. By the time I got to the part about the vacation house, her jaw had dropped. He called you useless after all you've done for him, she said, her voice rising with indignation. And then had the audacity to tell you he was leaving for some 20-year-old? Are you kidding me? I shook my head, swirling the wine in my glass. Nope, that's Todd. Always so self-assured, always thinking I'd just roll over and accept it. But you didn't, Grace said, a smile breaking through her anger. You walked out. You took back the house. And honestly, Lydia, good for you. Hearing her say it out loud made something inside me shift. I hadn't just walked away from Todd. I'd walked away from years of trying to be someone he could appreciate, someone who would never be enough for him. What now? Grace asked, snapping me out of my thoughts. I don't know, I admitted. I've been so wrapped up in making our marriage work. I don't even know who I am outside of it. Grace reached across the table and placed a hand over mine. You figure it out, one step at a time, but first you stay here tonight. No arguing. I smiled. Thanks, Grace. Later that night, as I lay on the couch in her living room, I felt the exhaustion of the day finally catch up to me. But beneath the tiredness was something else. Relief. Todd was no longer my problem. For years, I'd bent over backward to make him happy, and now I didn't have to. I didn't know what the future held, but I was excited to find out. The morning after I left Todd, I woke up in Grace's living room to the sound of my phone vibrating relentlessly on the coffee table. Groaning, I reached for it, squinting at the screen. Missed calls. 6. Text messages. 14. All from Todd. I unlocked my phone, scrolling through the barrage of messages. Where did you go? We need to talk. You're being childish, Lydia. You can't just walk away like this. The last one made me laugh bitterly. Walk away? That's exactly what he'd told me he was doing last night. Grace wandered into the room, a cup of coffee in hand. Let me guess. Todd? Bingo, I muttered, holding up the phone. He's losing it. Well, what did he expect? She said, setting the coffee down in front of me. You don't get to treat someone like garbage and then act shocked when they stop putting up with it. I nodded, sipping the coffee. He's not used to consequences. He's always gotten away with everything, his arrogance, his selfishness. But this time, he's not getting what he wants. Damn right he's not, Grace said, a satisfied grin on her face. Later that day, I received another text, but this one caught my attention. I'll come by the house later. We need to sort this out. My house. He was still acting like it was his, like he had any right to come and go as he pleased. I thought about replying, telling him to stay away, but then I remembered something Grace had said the night before. Let him stew in it for a while. Instead, I ignored the text and spent the day with Grace, helping her with errands and catching up on parts of my life I'd neglected for years. By the time I returned to my house that evening, Todd's car was already parked in the driveway. I parked on the street, taking a deep breath before walking up to the door. He was pacing in the living room when I walked in, his expression a mix of anger and desperation. "You finally decided to show up," he said, his voice sharp. "I live here," I replied calmly, setting my purse down on the counter. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," he said, his tone softening. "This has gotten out of hand." I folded my arms, leaning against the counter. "What's gotten out of hand, Todd? The fact that I finally stood up for myself? Or the fact that you're realizing Mara isn't the prize you thought she was?" His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might explode. But instead, he sat down on the couch, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I made a mistake, okay? I wasn't thinking clearly. But we can fix this." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Fix this? Todd, this isn't a broken vase. This is years of you taking me for granted, dismissing everything I do, and expecting me to keep smiling through it." "Lydia," he started, but I cut him off. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to decide when we fix things. You made your choice. Now, you can live with it." I grabbed my bag and walked upstairs, leaving him sitting there in stunned silence. The day after Todd's tantrum, I packed his things, left them neatly by the front door, and changed the locks. When he came back that evening, looking smug as ever, I met him on the porch with a firm expression and a folder in hand. "What's this?" he asked, glancing down at the papers I held. "Your things," I said, gesturing to the suitcase by the door. "And this is the contact information for the lawyer I hired this morning. You'll be hearing from her soon." His jaw tightened, but he still couldn't resist one last dig. "You're being ridiculous, Lydia. You can't handle life without me." I smiled faintly. "We'll see about that. Now get off my porch." He stared at me, his confidence finally faltering before grabbing his suitcase and stalking off. Over the next 2 weeks, Todd's absence felt like a breath of fresh air. The house was quieter, cleaner, but it felt like a home instead of a battlefield. I stayed busy, throwing myself into work, reconnecting with friends, and leaning on Grace for emotional support. She was thrilled to see me finally standing up for myself. "Good riddance," she'd said when I told her I'd kicked Todd out. "He was a leech, Lydia. You're better off without him." I knew she was right, but there were moments, quiet ones, usually late at night, when doubt crept in. Had I really done the right thing? What if I ended up regretting it? Those thoughts didn't last long, though, especially not after I got the call from Todd. "Lydia," he said, his voice tight with frustration, "we need to talk." I sighed, already tired of the conversation before it began. "What do you want, Todd?" "It's Mara," he said, bitterness dripping from every word. "She's gone." The corner of my mouth twitched. "Is that so?" "She laughed at me," he spat, the words coming out in a rush. "She said I was pathetic, said I threw away the only good thing I had going for me. She couldn't believe I let you keep the house." Now I was smiling outright. "Ah, the house. I'm sure that stung." "She said I was an idiot," he continued, ignoring my sarcasm. "A complete loser for losing everything you'd worked for." And then she walked out. It was almost too satisfying to hear. The man who dismissed me, belittled me, and thought he could replace me with someone younger was finally facing the consequences of his actions. "And now you're calling me because—" I asked, my tone cool. "Because I made a mistake," he said, his voice dropping. "A huge mistake. Can we talk? Please?" I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No, Todd. We have nothing to talk about. You made your bed. Now you can lie in it." Before he could respond, I hung up, letting the silence settle around me like a warm blanket. That night, as I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, I felt a deep sense of relief. Todd's life was unraveling, but for the first time, it wasn't my problem. I had my life back, and I wasn't looking back. The divorce process moved faster than I'd anticipated. My lawyer helped me organize my finances, document everything, and ensure that I'd be protected. Now, as I sat in her office reviewing the finalized paperwork, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, closure, and a lingering twinge of disbelief that this chapter of my life was finally ending. "Everything looks solid," my lawyer said, flipping through the pages. "Todd doesn't have much leverage here, especially since he hasn't contested anything. Frankly, I think he knows he's not in a position to fight you." I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I think he's finally realized I'm not the pushover he thought I was." She chuckled. "I'd say you've made that very clear." As I left her office that afternoon, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying seemed to lift. The paperwork was filed, my finances were secure, and Todd was officially out of my life, on paper and in reality. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. That same evening, Grace came over with a bottle of wine and her usual flair for celebrating my victories. "To Lydia," she said, raising her glass, "the woman who finally kicked Todd to the curb and reclaimed her life." I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. "To Grace, the friend who never once said, 'I told you so.'" "Not yet, anyway," she teased, taking a sip. As the night went on, we talked about everything: my plans for the future, her latest escapades, and of course, Todd's dramatic fall from grace. "So," Grace said, leaning back on the couch with a smirk, "do you think he's still crying over Mara?" "Probably," I replied, grinning. "But it's not like he has much else going for him. No wife, no house, no mistress. Honestly, I almost feel bad for him." "Almost," Grace said, laughing. That night, after Grace left, I sat alone in the quiet of my home, reflecting on everything that had happened. The old me, the one who bent over backward to keep Todd happy, who worried endlessly about his approval, felt like a distant memory. This new version of myself, the one who could laugh at his downfall and find joy in reclaiming my life, was here to stay. Todd had underestimated me, but I hadn't. I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The weeks after the divorce were a whirlwind of change, but the chaos felt like mine to control. Without Todd's shadow looming over every decision, I found myself rediscovering the pieces of me that had been buried under years of his criticism and demands. It wasn't just about rebuilding, it was about thriving. One of the first things I did was visit the vacation house. For so long, it had been this abstract symbol of hope, a promise of something better for our future. But now, it was mine, completely untethered from Todd or his arrogance. When I pulled up to the property, nestled against the backdrop of a serene lake and surrounded by towering pines, I felt a rush of pride. I'd done this. I'd made this dream a reality. Not for Todd, not for us, but for me. Inside, the house was everything I'd imagined, cozy but spacious, with large windows that framed the picturesque view. I spent the weekend there alone, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and savoring the peace that came with knowing I no longer had to share it with someone who didn't value me. Grace came to visit the following weekend, bringing her usual brand of contagious energy. "This place is amazing," she said, spinning in a slow circle in the living room. "How did you keep this a secret for so long?" "I don't know," I admitted, laughing. "I think I wanted it to be perfect before I shared it with anyone. And honestly, part of me was afraid Todd would ruin it." "Well, it's perfect now," she said, plopping onto the couch. "And you deserve every bit of it." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sunlight streaming through the windows. I felt like I truly deserved something good. As the weeks turned into months, I started to fill my life with things I'd put on hold for too long. I took up photography again, spending hours capturing the beauty of the lake and the surrounding woods. I joined a local book club, something Todd had always scoffed at as a waste of time. And I started traveling, not for work, not to meet anyone's expectations, but simply because I wanted to. Each new experience felt like a small rebellion against the version of myself I'd been with Todd. I wasn't just living, I was thriving. One evening, as I sat on the deck of the vacation house with a glass of wine in hand, I thought about the life I'd left behind. There was no anger anymore, no bitterness, just gratitude for the lessons I'd learned and the freedom I'd gained. A few months after the divorce was finalized, life felt like it had finally settled into a new rhythm. The vacation house became my sanctuary, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts or invite friends over to share the peace I'd found. Grace visited often, usually with a bottle of wine and stories about her latest adventures. "You've completely transformed, you know that?" she said one evening as we sat by the fire pit overlooking the lake. I looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "Transformed how?" Grace grinned. "The old Lydia?" She would have been fussing over everyone else's comfort, worried about whether the cushions were fluffed or the glasses were filled. "This Lydia?" She gestured at me, sitting in sweatpants with a cozy blanket wrapped around my shoulders. "She's relaxed, happy, and not giving a damn about what anyone thinks." I laughed, sipping my wine. I guess I've realized I can only control my own happiness. Trying to make Todd happy was like pouring water into a bucket with a hole in it. It was never enough. Those lessons extended beyond the house, too. I started freelancing, something I'd always wanted to do but never pursued, because Todd thought it was too unstable. Now my schedule was my own, and the freedom was exhilarating. One of my clients, a design firm, invited me to lead a workshop for their team. The experience reignited a confidence in me I hadn't felt in years. "Why haven't you started your own business?" the CEO asked after the workshop. The question lingered in my mind long after I left the meeting. Why hadn't I? A few weeks later, I started laying the groundwork for my own consulting firm. It was terrifying, but for the first time, I wasn't holding myself back out of fear of failure, or worse, Todd's disapproval. Grace cheered me on every step of the way, even helping me come up with a name for the business. "Phoenix Consulting," she suggested, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Because you've risen from the ashes like the badass you are." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help smiling. Phoenix Consulting it is. As I poured myself into building the business, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. Every small win, a new client, a glowing review, a successful project, was a reminder of how far I'd come. And for every win, there was a quiet moment of gratitude. Gratitude for the strength I'd found, for the friends who'd supported me, and for the chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. One evening, as I sat on the deck with my laptop, finalizing plans for a new project, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Todd. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a moment before deleting the message without replying. Some things were better left in the past. 6 months after I walked away from Todd, I stood on the deck of the vacation house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The lake shimmered with hues of orange and pink, the kind of view that used to feel like a luxury but now felt like a promise I'd made to myself and kept. I had built a life I was proud of. Phoenix Consulting was thriving, far beyond what I'd imagined when I started. The freedom to choose my clients, my hours, and my projects made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. Grace visited that evening, as she often did, carrying a box of pastries from a local bakery. "You know, I never thought I'd say this," she said, setting the box on the table, "but I think Todd did you a favor." I laughed, pouring us both a glass of wine. "You're not wrong. If he hadn't been such a jerk, I might still be stuck trying to make him happy." She raised her glass. "To Todd, the world's most clueless man, for setting you free." We clinked glasses, laughing, but her words stayed with me long after she left. I'd been so focused on moving forward that I hadn't stopped to reflect on just how much had changed. The timid version of myself who constantly sought Todd's approval felt like a stranger now. This new life wasn't just about escaping a bad marriage. It was about rediscovering who I was, what I wanted, and what made me happy. And I felt like I knew the answers. As the stars began to dot the sky, I grabbed a notebook and pen, jotting down ideas for the future. A new marketing strategy for Phoenix Consulting, A list of places I wanted to travel to next. Goals I hadn't dared to dream of until now. Later, as I closed the notebook and looked out at the lake, I realized something. I wasn't just free from Todd's expectations. I was free from my own doubts, the ones that had kept me small and scared for so long. A month later, I received an email from one of my new clients. The subject line read, "Keynote Opportunity." Curious, I opened it and scanned the message. They wanted me to speak at an upcoming industry conference about my journey as an entrepreneur, highlighting the success of Phoenix Consulting. For a moment, I hesitated. Public speaking had never been my strong suit. Todd had often mocked me for fumbling over my words during casual conversations, let alone something as formal as a keynote speech. But this time, his voice didn't matter. I hit reply and typed, "I'd be honored to participate." Preparing for the keynote became a new focus, and with Grace's encouragement, I poured my energy into crafting a speech that felt authentic. "Don't sugarcoat anything," Grace advised. "Tell your story the way it is. Failures, triumphs, all of it. That's what people connect with." And that's exactly what I did. The day of the conference arrived, and as I stood backstage waiting for my turn to speak, I felt a familiar mix of nerves and excitement. When the host introduced me, I walked onto the stage to polite applause. Taking a deep breath, I began. "My name is Lydia, and a year ago I never would have imagined standing here. Back then, my life revolved around trying to meet the expectations of someone who didn't believe in me. But today, I'm here because I chose to believe in myself." As I spoke, sharing the story of how Phoenix Consulting was born from a place of rediscovery, I noticed heads nodding in the audience. People were leaning in, smiling, and even jotting down notes. I felt like my voice mattered, not just to me, but to others. After the speech, several attendees approached me to share their own stories of struggle and resilience. "You inspired me today," one woman said, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you for reminding me it's never too late to start over." Her words stayed with me as I left the conference, feeling more empowered than ever. That evening, as I sat on the deck of the vacation house, I thought about everything that had led me here. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the doubts. It had all been part of the journey. Todd was a distant memory now, his texts and calls long ignored. Mara had been right. He was a loser. But I didn't need validation from her, him, or anyone else. I had built a life I loved, one step at a time, and it was just getting started. This was my story now, and I was writing every word.